The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air at Bellacorte, the most prestigious restaurant in downtown Harbor City. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in pristine white linen, where wealthy patrons discussed million-dollar deals over $30 appetizers. Vincent Marcelli stood behind the mahogany bar, polishing wine glasses with the practiced precision of a man who had built an empire from nothing. His tailored suit cost more than most people made in a month, and his diamond cufflinks caught the light as he moved. At 52, Vincent owned 3 restaurants, 2 hotels, and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless with anyone he considered beneath him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vincent's dark eyes swept across his domain with the satisfaction of a king surveying his kingdom. Every detail was perfect, from the spotless marble floors to the precisely folded napkins. He had clawed his way up from poverty in Little Italy, and now he ruled over Harbor City's finest dining establishment with an iron fist. His employees feared him, his competitors envied him, and his customers paid premium prices for the privilege of eating in his restaurant. Vincent had learned long ago that respect came through fear, and kindness was a luxury he could not afford. The evening rush was winding down when Vincent noticed a commotion near the kitchen doors. A young man in the standard black busboy uniform was struggling to balance a heavy tray of dirty dishes. The kid looked to be in his early 20s, thin and tired, with calloused hands that spoke of long hours of manual labor. His name tag read Danny, and Vincent had hired him 3 weeks ago from a group of applicants desperate for work. Danny Chen worked the late shift, clearing tables after the wealthy patrons had departed, mopping floors and washing dishes until the early morning hours. Danny had been invisible to Vincent until tonight, just another face among the dozen low-wage workers who kept Bellacorte running behind the scenes. The busboy worked quietly, efficiently, never complaining about the grueling hours or the way some customers treated him like he was part of the furniture. Vincent had noticed that Danny always arrived early and stayed late, taking on extra tasks without being asked, but hard work meant little to Vincent if it came from someone he considered expendable. As Danny struggled with the heavy tray, one of the regular customers, Mrs. Patricia Whitmore, a wealthy socialite known for her charity galas and sharp tongue, called out loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Excuse me, young man, you've been clearing tables around us for 20 minutes, and you still haven't taken away our dessert plates. Some of us have important places to be." Danny hurried over to her table, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I'll take care of that right away." He quickly began stacking the empty plates, but Mrs. Whitmore was not finished with her public criticism. "You know," she said to her dining companions, her voice carrying across the restaurant, "the help just isn't what it used to be. These people have no pride in their work, no understanding of proper service." She gestured dismissively at Danny as if he were not standing right beside her. "I suppose that's what happens when you hire just anyone off the street." Vincent watched the scene unfold from behind the bar, feeling a familiar mixture of annoyance and superiority. He did not like his customers being dissatisfied, but he also felt no sympathy for Danny's humiliation. In Vincent's world, there were winners and losers, predators and prey. Danny was clearly prey, and Mrs. Whitmore was simply following the natural order of things by asserting her dominance over someone weaker. Danny finished clearing the table without responding to Mrs. Whitmore's insults, but Vincent could see the young man's hands shaking slightly as he carried the dishes toward the kitchen. Something about the kid's silent dignity irritated Vincent more than if Danny had fought back or made excuses. There was a quiet strength in the way Danny absorbed the humiliation without breaking, and Vincent found that strength threatening in a way he could not quite explain. The restaurant began to empty as the evening grew later, but Mrs. Whitmore and her friends lingered over their wine, continuing their conversation about the declining quality of service workers. Vincent found himself walking over to their table, drawn by an impulse to join in their criticism of his employee. "Mrs. Whitmore," Vincent said with his most charming smile, I apologize if our service tonight was not up to your usual standards. Please allow me to comp your dessert course." He shot a cold look toward the kitchen where Danny had disappeared. Some people simply do not understand what it takes to work in a fine establishment like this. Mrs. Whitmore smiled approvingly. "That's very generous of you, Vincent. You know, I was just telling my friends that the problem with young people today is that they have no appreciation for culture or refinement. They think manual labor is all they're capable of, so that's all they aspire to." "Exactly right," Vincent agreed, warming to the topic. "These kids grow up in their little bubbles, never exposed to anything beyond their immediate circumstances. They have no understanding of art, music, literature, the finer things that separate civilization from barbarism." At that moment, Danny emerged from the kitchen carrying a mop and bucket, preparing for his nightly floor cleaning routine. Mrs. Whitmore noticed him and gestured in his direction. "Take that young man, for instance. I'll bet he's never been to a symphony, never read a classic novel, probably doesn't even know who Beethoven is." Vincent laughed, a sound with more edge than humor. "You're probably right. These people think culture is whatever's playing on the radio in their cars." He raised his voice slightly, ensuring that Danny could hear him from across the restaurant. "It's not their fault, really. They just don't have the capacity to appreciate anything beyond their basic needs." Danny continued mopping, but Vincent noticed that the young man's movements had become more deliberate, more controlled. Something about Danny's reaction, or lack of reaction, annoyed Vincent further. He wanted to see the busboy crumble under the weight of their criticism, wanted confirmation that he was dealing with someone weak and inferior. Mrs. Whitmore's friend, a woman named Caroline,
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Vincent smiled with the confidence of a man who knew he held all the cards. "Then you can find somewhere else to work. I'll give you tonight to pack up your things, and you can look for a job more suited to your limitations." The restaurant had become completely silent, except for the soft background jazz playing through the sound system. Even the kitchen staff had emerged from the back to watch the confrontation unfold. Vincent could see Danny's co-workers looking worried, some of them shaking their heads as if to warn him away from accepting the challenge. Danny stood perfectly still for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the piano keys. Vincent could almost see the wheels turning in the young man's head, could almost taste the satisfaction of watching this presumptuous employee back down in humiliation. But then Danny did something Vincent had not expected. Danny pulled out the piano bench and sat down. Vincent felt a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly overwhelmed by amusement. The kid was actually going to go through with this charade. Vincent could hardly wait to see what kind of embarrassing noise would emerge from the piano when Danny's clumsy fingers touched the keys. "This should be good," Mrs. Whitmore whispered to her friends, loud enough for everyone to hear. Danny placed his hands on the keyboard, his posture straight, his fingers curved in a way that looked surprisingly natural. Vincent began to feel the first small stirring of unease, but he pushed it aside. Good posture meant nothing if you did not know how to actually play. What happened next would change everything. Danny's fingers moved across the keys with startling precision, producing the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The music that flowed from the Steinway was not the tentative plinking of an amateur, but the confident, nuanced playing of someone who understood both the technical demands and the emotional depth of the piece. Vincent felt his confidence evaporate like steam from a hot plate. This was not possible. This busboy, this kid who spent his nights mopping floors and washing dishes, was playing classical music with a skill and sensitivity that Vincent had only heard from professional concert pianists. The restaurant had become a concert hall. Every conversation had stopped. Every movement had ceased, as Danny's playing filled the space with music of extraordinary beauty and complexity. His fingers moved with fluid grace across the keys, producing cascades of notes that seemed to tell a story of longing and loss and ultimate triumph. Mrs. Whitmore's smug expression had frozen on her face, replaced by a look of shock and disbelief. Her friends sat with their mouths slightly open, their wine glasses forgotten in their hands. The kitchen staff had gathered in the doorway, their eyes wide with amazement as they watched their quiet co-worker transform before their eyes. Vincent stood rooted to the spot, his mind reeling as he tried to process what he was witnessing. This was not just competent amateur playing. This was artistry of the highest order, music that seemed to reach into the chest and squeeze the heart. Danny's interpretation of the Chopin piece was both technically flawless and emotionally devastating, each phrase shaped with the kind of understanding that came from years of serious study and natural talent. As the music continued, Vincent began to notice details that made his discomfort even more acute. Danny's hands, which Vincent had dismissed as the crude tools of a laborer, moved with the elegant precision of a surgeon. His posture, his breathing, his complete absorption in the music, all spoke of someone who had spent countless hours at the piano, someone for whom music was not a foreign language but a native tongue. The Chopin piece built to its dramatic climax, Danny's left hand providing a thunderous bass line while his right hand sang out the melody with heartbreaking beauty. Vincent could see tears in the eyes of some of his customers, could see the kitchen staff swaying slightly to the rhythm of the music. Even the hardened waitstaff, who had seen every kind of performance and pretension in their years of restaurant work, stood transfixed by what they were hearing. When Danny finally played the last, lingering notes of the piece, the silence that followed was profound and complete. No one moved, no one spoke, no one seemed to breathe. The echo of the final chord hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Danny lifted his hands from the keys and sat quietly, his head slightly bowed, waiting. Vincent realized that every eye in the restaurant was now focused on him, waiting to see if he would honor the promise he had made so confidently just minutes before. Vincent's legs felt weak, his mouth dry. He had built his entire identity around being the smartest person in the room, the one who could read people instantly and accurately. His success had come from his ability to judge character, to identify weakness and exploit it, to maintain his position at the top of the social hierarchy through a combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. But he had been completely utterly wrong about Danny Chen. Mrs. Whitmore was the first to break the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. That was extraordinary. She looked at Danny with an expression Vincent had never seen on her face before, something that looked almost like respect. Vincent knew what he had to do. He had made a promise in front of witnesses, had staked his reputation on his ability to judge this young man's capabilities. The old Vincent, the Vincent of an hour ago, might have found a way to weasel out of his commitment, might have changed the terms or found some excuse to avoid the humiliation of admitting he had been wrong. But something about Danny's playing had shaken Vincent to his core. The music had been so beautiful, so honest, so completely without pretense or ego, that Vincent felt ashamed of his own petty cruelty. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Vincent felt the weight of his own behavior, saw himself as others must see him. Slowly, his knees shaking slightly, Vincent Marcelli lowered himself to the floor of his own restaurant. The expensive fabric of his suit touched the marble he had been so proud of, his diamond cufflinks catching the light from the chandelier he had personally. She paused, seeming to struggle with words. Your playing was magnificent. It was some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard. Other customers began to approach, offering their own apologies and praise. Vincent watched in amazement as his dining room transformed from a place of casual cruelty into something resembling a community. People who had been strangers minutes before were now talking to each other, sharing their reactions to Danny's performance, asking him questions about his musical training and his plans for the future. Caroline, Mrs. Whitmore's friend, had tears streaming down her face. I studied piano myself, she told Danny. I've been taking lessons for 5 years and I can barely manage a simple Mozart piece. What you just played, I can't even imagine having that kind of skill. Vincent found himself standing slightly apart from the group, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of emotions he had not experienced in years. He felt ashamed of his behavior, amazed by Danny's talent, and strangely moved by the way his restaurant had become a place of connection rather than division. But he also felt something else, something that took him a while to identify. He felt inspired. For the first time since he had clawed his way out of poverty, Vincent was face to face with someone whose abilities and character made him feel genuinely humble. Danny had not sought revenge or tried to make Vincent suffer for his cruelty. Instead, the young man had simply revealed who he really was, and in doing so had forced Vincent to confront who he really was. As the evening wore on and the customers eventually began to leave, each stopping to shake Danny's hand and express their admiration, Vincent found himself alone with his young employee. The kitchen staff had finished their closing duties and departed. The dining room had been cleaned and prepared for the next day, and the two men stood beside the piano in the quiet restaurant. "Danny," Vincent said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Why didn't you ever mention that you were a trained musician? Why did you let me treat you the way I did without defending yourself?" Danny considered the question carefully before answering. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," he said simply. "You didn't treat me badly because you thought I couldn't play piano. You treated me badly because you thought I was beneath you. If I had told you about my musical training, you might have been more polite to me, but you still would have looked down on the next busboy, or the dishwashers, or the cleaning crew." Vincent felt the truth of Danny's words like a physical blow. The young man was absolutely right. Vincent's cruelty had not been about Danny's abilities or lack thereof. It had been about Vincent's need to feel superior to someone, anyone, to maintain his position at the top of his carefully constructed social hierarchy. "You're right," Vincent admitted. "I've been a terrible person to work for, haven't I?" Danny's response was gentle but honest. "You've been someone who forgot that everyone has a story, everyone has dignity, everyone deserves basic respect regardless of their job or their circumstances." Vincent walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench where Danny had been sitting earlier. He pressed one key, producing a single clear note that hung in the air between them. "I can't play," Vincent said. "I've always told myself that I didn't need to know about music or art or culture because I was too busy making money, building my business. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I tried to learn something like this, I would discover that I wasn't as smart or as special as I thought I was." Danny pulled out a chair from a nearby table and sat down facing Vincent. "It's not too late to learn. Music doesn't care how old you are or what you've done in the past. It just cares whether you're willing to listen, to practice, to be patient with yourself." Vincent looked at Danny with genuine curiosity. Would you consider teaching me? I know I have no right to ask, after the way I've treated you, but I'd like to try to become a better person, and I think learning music might help." Danny smiled, and Vincent realized it was the first time he had ever seen the young man's face without the careful mask of professional courtesy that he wore during work. "I'd be honored to teach you, Mr. Marcelli, but I have one condition." "Name it." "From now on, when you see someone working in your restaurant or anywhere else, remember that they have their own story. They might be struggling with something you can't see. They might have talents and dreams that have nothing to do with their current job. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." Vincent extended his hand to Danny, and they shook on it. As their hands clasped, Vincent felt something shift inside him, some old hardness beginning to soften. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, protecting his position and his ego, that he had forgotten what it felt like to connect with another human being as an equal. "There's something else I want to do," Vincent said. "I want to pay off your father's medical debt." Danny's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Marcelli, that's not necessary. I didn't play tonight to try to get money from you. I know you didn't. That's exactly why I want to do it. You could have used your talent to manipulate people, to get what you wanted through emotional manipulation. Instead, you've just been quietly doing your work, taking care of your responsibilities, without asking for help."
He was, and he would have been proud of what happened tonight. Not because I got to show off my playing, but because it led to something good.
Because it helped someone change. They stood outside Bellacorte in the quiet street. Two men whose lives had been completely altered by a single evening, by a moment of unexpected grace. Vincent looked back at his restaurant, at the building that had been his pride and joy, and realized that it could become something even better than he had imagined. Not just a place where wealthy people came to be seen, but a place where music and humanity and genuine connection could flourish. "Same time tomorrow?" Vincent asked. Danny smiled. "I'll be there, and Mr. Marcelli, thank you for keeping your promise tonight, for getting down on your knees when you said you would. That took courage." As Danny walked away into the night, Vincent remained standing outside his restaurant, looking up at the stars that were barely visible through the city's glow. He thought about the man he had been when the evening started, and the man he hoped to become. He thought about the power of music to reveal truth, to break down the barriers that people built around themselves. Most of all, he thought about the lesson Danny had taught him without even trying. That dignity came not from what you owned or what position you held, but from how you treated others and how you responded to the challenges life presented. Vincent Marcelli went home that night, a changed man humbled by a busboy who had turned out to be so much more than he appeared, grateful for a lesson he had not known he needed to learn. The next morning arrived with unusual weight at Bellacorte. Vincent found himself awake before dawn, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse bedroom, replaying the events of the previous evening in his mind like scenes from a movie he could not turn off. The image of Danny's hands moving across the piano keys haunted him, not because it was painful, but because it had been so achingly beautiful. Vincent had built his life around the assumption that he could read people instantly, that he understood human nature better than most. Chen had shattered that assumption completely. Vincent dressed more carefully than usual, selecting a navy suit that was expensive but less ostentatious than his typical attire. As he knotted his silk tie, he caught sight of himself in the mirror and paused. The face looking back at him was the same one he had seen every morning for 52 years, but something in his eyes had changed. There was a vulnerability there that had not existed 24 hours earlier, a crack in the armor he had spent decades constructing. At Bellacorte, the morning prep crew was already at work when Vincent arrived. The kitchen hummed with the familiar sounds of chopping vegetables, heating oil, and setting up stations for the lunch service. Vincent normally made his rounds with military precision, checking every detail, criticizing anything that fell short of his exacting standards. Today he found himself moving more slowly, actually listening to the conversations around him, instead of simply monitoring for efficiency. Carlos, the head prep cook, was training a new hire on the proper technique for julienning carrots. Vincent had never bothered to learn the names of most of his kitchen staff, referring to them by their positions rather than treating them as individuals. But now he found himself wondering about Carlos's story, about how he had learned to cook, about what dreams he might harbor beyond this kitchen. "Good morning, Carlos," Vincent said, surprising both himself and the cook with the personal greeting. Carlos looked up from his cutting board with obvious confusion. In the 3 years he had worked at Bellacorte, Vincent had never addressed him by name, had rarely spoken to him at all except to bark orders or express dissatisfaction. "Good morning, Mr. Marcelli," Carlos replied cautiously, as if he suspected this might be some kind of test. "How long have you been cooking?" Vincent asked, leaning against the stainless steel counter in a way that suggested he had time for an actual conversation. Carlos set down his knife, clearly unsure how to respond to this unprecedented interest in his background. "About 15 years, sir. I started when I was 16, washing dishes at my uncle's restaurant in Queens." "Marcelli," Danny said quietly, "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Vincent had been asking himself the same question since he had contacted his accountant that morning. The practical part of his mind, the part that had built his fortune through careful calculation and strategic thinking, told him that spending $50,000 on an employee he had known for 3 weeks was financial madness. But another part of his mind, a part that had been dormant for decades, told him that this was the first meaningful thing he had done with his money in years. All his wealth had been accumulated for its own sake, hoarded like a dragon's treasure, used primarily to intimidate and impress others. Here was an opportunity to use his resources to restore something beautiful that had been damaged by circumstances beyond anyone's control. "Because last night, you gave me something I didn't know I was missing," Vincent said. "You reminded me what it feels like to witness real excellence, real artistry. You showed me what grace looks like when someone has every reason to be bitter or vengeful." Danny set the check down carefully on the table. "This is too much. I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because I don't want to be bought. I don't want to become your pet project, your way of feeling good about yourself." Danny's voice was firm but not angry. "If you're doing this because you feel guilty about how you treated me, that's not a good enough reason." Vincent felt a surge of respect for Danny's integrity. Even faced with the solution to all his financial problems, the young man was unwilling to compromise his dignity. It was exactly the kind of response Vincent should have expected from someone with Danny's character. "You're right to be suspicious," Vincent admitted. "Part of this is about guilt, but it's also about something else. Last night you could have humiliated me completely. You could have made me grovel, could have used your talent as a weapon to destroy my reputation. Instead, you played with such honesty and beauty that it changed everyone who heard it, including me." Vincent stood up and walked to the small window that looked out onto the alley behind the restaurant. "Danny, I've been successful in business because I'm good at identifying value and potential. Last night, I realized that I had completely failed to see the most valuable person in my own restaurant. That's not just guilt talking. That's recognition." Danny was quiet for several minutes, studying the documents in the folder. When he finally looked up, his expression had softened slightly. "If I accept this," Danny said, "I want to do something in return. Not because I owe you, but because I think we could create something good together." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to start a music program here. Not just me playing dinner music for your wealthy customers, but something that actually helps people." Danny's voice grew more animated as he spoke. "There are kids in this neighborhood who have never heard live classical music, who think culture is something that exists only for rich people. I want to change that." Vincent felt a spark of excitement that reminded him of the early days of building his business, when he had been driven by vision rather than just profit. "Tell me more." "Free concerts on Sunday afternoons. Music lessons for kids whose families can't afford private instruction. Maybe even scholarships for students who show real potential." Danny leaned forward, his eyes bright with possibility. "We could use the dining room when it's normally closed. It's got perfect acoustics, and it's beautiful enough to make people feel like they're experiencing something special." "And you think people would come? Families from the neighborhood?" "I know they would. There's hunger for beauty, for inspiration, for something that lifts people up instead of making them feel small. You saw how your customers reacted last night. Music has power that goes beyond class or education or economics." Vincent found himself nodding, caught up in Danny's enthusiasm. "What would you need to make this happen?" "Space, which you already have. A few more instruments which I can help select, and marketing to let people know that this exists, that they're welcome here regardless of whether they can afford to eat at Bellacorte." The idea was ambitious, potentially expensive, and completely unlike anything Vincent had ever associated with his restaurant. It was also the first business proposition he had heard in years that excited him more than it worried him. "Let's do it," Vincent said. "But I have one condition." Danny raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I want to be one of your students. I meant what I said last night about learning to play piano. If we're going to turn Bellacorte into a place that celebrates music, I should probably understand what we're celebrating." Danny smiled, and Vincent realized it was becoming one of his favorite expressions in the world. There was no mockery in it, no sense of superiority despite the reversal of their roles, just genuine warmth and the kind of patience that good teachers possessed naturally. I'd be honored to teach you, Mr. Marcelli, but I should warn you, learning piano as an adult is challenging. It requires patience and humility. I think I'm ready for both of those things, Vincent said. For the first time in my life, I'm actually ready. They spent the next hour planning the music program, sketching out ideas for concerts and classes. This felt different. The attention was focused not on his wealth or his achievements, but on something he was trying to create for others. Danny's first piano lesson took place on a quiet Tuesday evening after the restaurant had closed. Vincent sat at the Steinway with the awkward posture of someone who had never touched a keyboard, his large hands hovering uncertainly over the keys. Danny sat beside him on the bench, demonstrating proper finger position and explaining the basics of musical notation. The most important thing to remember, Danny said, is that everyone starts as a beginner. Every great pianist, every composer you've ever admired, began exactly where you are right now. Vincent pressed middle C with his index finger, producing a single clear note. It was the first intentional music he had ever made in his life, and he was surprised by how satisfying it felt. It's harder than it looks, Vincent admitted, as he struggled to play a simple scale. Everything worthwhile is hard, Danny replied. But the difficulty is part of what makes it meaningful. When you finally play your first real piece, you'll appreciate it more because you'll understand how much work went into creating those sounds. As the weeks passed, Vincent found himself looking forward to his piano lessons with an anticipation he had not felt since childhood. The learning process was humbling in ways he had not expected. His fingers, so deft at calculating profits and negotiating deals, felt clumsy and uncoordinated on the keyboard. His mind, trained to process complex business information instantly, struggled to read simple musical notation. But there was also joy in the struggle, satisfaction in the gradual accumulation of small skills that built toward larger capabilities. When Vincent finally managed to play Mary Had a Little Lamb with both hands, he felt a pride that was entirely different from the satisfaction of closing a business deal or opening a new restaurant. Danny proved to be a patient and encouraging teacher. He never showed frustration when Vincent repeated the same mistake multiple times, never made Vincent feel foolish for asking basic questions. Instead, he found ways to connect musical concepts to things Vincent already understood, drawing parallels between the structure of a musical composition and the organization of a successful business. The first community concert was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon in late autumn. Vincent had spent the previous week in a state of nervous excitement, wondering if anyone would actually show up to hear live music in a restaurant dining room. He had done everything he could think of to spread the word, placing ads in community newspapers, posting flyers in local schools and libraries, even personally visiting the neighborhood's community center to invite families personally. On the morning of the concert, Vincent arrived at Bellacorte early to help set up. The dining tables had been moved to create space for folding chairs borrowed from a local church. The Steinway had been tuned and positioned so that everyone in the room would have a clear view of the keyboard. Fresh flowers, donated by a local florist who had heard about the program, added color and warmth to the space. Danny arrived an hour before the concert was scheduled to begin, carrying a worn leather satchel that contained his sheet music. He was dressed in the same simple black suit he had worn to his conservatory recitals, and Vincent thought he looked every inch the professional musician he had trained to be. Nervous, Vincent asked as Danny warmed up with scales and arpeggios. Always, Danny admitted, but it's good nervous. The kind that keeps you sharp and focused. Vincent understood exactly what Danny meant. He felt the same mixture of excitement and anxiety that he had experienced before important business presentations, but with an additional layer of meaning that came from knowing they were creating something purely for the benefit of others. The first families began arriving 15 minutes early. Vincent watched from the kitchen doorway as parents with young children filled the chairs, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and tentative hope. Many of them had never been inside Bellacorte before, had never felt welcome in a place they associated with wealth and exclusivity. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with her 3 grandchildren, their hair neatly combed and their clothes pressed for the special occasion. Behind them came the Patel family from the grocery store down the street, the 2 Johnson sisters who ran the neighborhood day care center, and dozens of other faces that Vincent had seen around the community but had never bothered to acknowledge. Caroline had kept her promise to help with outreach, bringing several families from her elementary school. She moved through the crowd like a gracious hostess, making sure everyone felt welcome and introducing families to each other. By the time the concert was scheduled to begin, every chair was filled and people were standing along the walls. Vincent estimated nearly 100 people had come, far more than he had dared to hope for. The dining room buzzed with quiet conversation and the excited whispers of children who had never attended a live musical performance. Danny took his place at the piano and the room gradually fell silent. It would mean abandoning his plans to return to graduate school, at least temporarily. It would mean committing himself to a path that was largely undefined, with no guarantee of where it might lead. "I accept," Danny said finally. "But I want to do this in partnership with you, not as your employee. I want us to make decisions together, to build something that reflects both of our visions." Vincent extended his hand, and they shook on it. As their hands clasped, Vincent felt the same sense of possibility he had experienced as a young man starting his first restaurant, but amplified by the knowledge that this venture was about more than personal success or financial gain. "Partners," Vincent agreed. In creating something beautiful, 6 months later, Bellacorte had become an entirely different place. The dining room that once intimidated visitors, with its cold elegance, now welcomed families from across Harbor City for weekly concerts, music lessons, and community gatherings. Vincent had installed additional pianos in a converted private dining room, creating dedicated practice spaces for the 37 children now enrolled in the music program. The transformation extended beyond the physical space. Vincent's entire approach to business had shifted from extracting maximum profit to creating maximum value for his community. Restaurant revenues had actually increased as word spread about Bellacorte's new identity, but Vincent found himself caring less about the financial metrics that had once consumed his attention. Danny stood before a room full of 8-year-olds, their small hands positioned carefully on miniature keyboards donated by local music stores. Teaching children required different skills than performing for adults. Each lesson became an exercise in patience, creativity, and finding ways to make abstract musical concepts accessible to young minds. "Remember what we learned about rhythm," Danny said, clapping his hands in a steady beat. "Music lives in time just like we do. When you play together, you're sharing time with each other." Among his students was Maria Santos, Mrs. Rodriguez's youngest granddaughter, whose natural musicality had emerged during her very first lesson. Maria possessed the rare combination of technical aptitude and emotional sensitivity that mark truly gifted musicians. Danny had begun giving her additional instruction after the group classes, nurturing her talent with the same careful attention he had once received from his own teachers. Vincent often observed these lessons from the doorway, marveling at Danny's ability to connect with children while maintaining their focus and enthusiasm. Teaching had revealed aspects of Danny's personality that even their friendship had not exposed. With young students, Danny displayed infinite patience, boundless creativity, and an intuitive understanding of how to encourage without overwhelming. The adult piano lessons had also flourished beyond Vincent's expectations. Caroline had enrolled along with several other parents, creating a supportive community of beginning musicians who practiced together and celebrated each other's progress. Vincent had progressed from simple scales to playing basic classical pieces, though his technique remained elementary compared to the natural grace he witnessed in his younger fellow students. The most surprising development had been the emergence of hidden musical talents among Bellacorte's staff. Carlos, the prep cook who had dreamed of teaching, discovered he possessed a remarkable singing voice during one of the community concerts. 2 waitresses had begun learning guitar, practicing together during breaks between shifts. Even Margaret, the stern hostess who had worked at Bellacorte for 12 years, revealed she had once played violin and was considering resuming lessons. These discoveries reinforced Danny's belief that musical ability was far more common than most people realized, waiting to be awakened by opportunity and encouragement. Every week brought new evidence that talent existed in unexpected places, requiring only recognition and cultivation to flourish. The success of Bellacorte's music program had attracted attention from Harbour City's cultural establishment. The mayor had visited twice, bringing city council members to witness the community concerts. Local newspapers featured regular coverage of the program's activities and impact. 3 other restaurants in the city had contacted Vincent seeking advice on implementing similar initiatives. But the most meaningful recognition came from the families whose lives had been touched by the program. Children who had never imagined themselves as musicians were performing confidently in recitals. Parents were bonding with their children over shared practice sessions. Elderly community members attended every concert, finding in the music a connection to memories and emotions they had thought were lost. Vincent's relationship with his employees had been completely rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect and genuine interest in their well-being. He had implemented profit sharing for all staff, established a fund for continuing education, and created flexible scheduling to accommodate workers' family responsibilities and personal goals. The changes had resulted in virtually zero employee turnover, unprecedented in the restaurant industry. The success story faced its first serious challenge when a corporate restaurant chain made an aggressive offer to purchase Bellacorte. The offer was substantial, nearly triple what Vincent had estimated as the restaurant's value just 2 years earlier. The purchasing company specialized in acquiring successful independent restaurants and converting them into standardized franchises, maximizing profits through operational efficiency and reduced labor costs. Vincent's lawyers advised him to seriously consider the offer. The sale would make him incredibly wealthy even by his previous standards, and he could retire comfortably, while the new owners assumed all operational responsibilities and risks. From a purely financial perspective, accepting the offer made perfect sense. But Vincent found himself unable to imagine Bellacorte without Danny's music program, without the community concerts that had become the highlight of his week, without the children whose faces lit up when they successfully played their first complete piece. The money felt abstract compared to the concrete joy he witnessed every day in his transformed restaurant. Danny's response to news of the offer was characteristically thoughtful. He did not pressure Vincent to reject the sale or guilt him about abandoning their partnership. Instead, he asked questions that helped Vincent clarify his own values and priorities. "What would make you happiest 5 years from now?" Danny asked during one of their planning sessions for the upcoming winter concert series. "Having more money than you could spend in several lifetimes, or continuing to build something that brings music and..." As they locked up the venue and prepared to part ways for the evening, Vincent felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected path his life had taken. He had achieved wealth and professional success through determination and intelligence, but he had found meaning and genuine fulfillment only through learning to see the humanity and potential in others. The transformation that began with a cruel challenge and a moment of musical revelation had rippled outward to touch hundreds of lives. Children were discovering their artistic capabilities, families were bonding over shared musical experiences, and a community was being woven together through the universal language of music. Danny had kept his promise from that first night, using his response to cruelty as an opportunity to create something beautiful and lasting. Vincent had honored his commitment to Neil when proven wrong, but more importantly, he had remained humble enough to continue learning and growing in the months and years that followed. Walking home through the familiar streets of Harbour City, Vincent could hear music drifting from open windows, children practicing pieces they had learned at the foundation, families gathering around pianos that had been donated or purchased through scholarship programs. The sound of music had become the soundtrack of positive change, proof that transformation was possible when people were willing to listen to each other with open hearts and minds. The boy who had once used cruelty to maintain his sense of superiority had become a man who understood that true strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. The quiet busboy who had absorbed humiliation with dignity had become a leader who used his gifts to create opportunities for others to discover their own hidden talents. Their story had become part of Harbor City's identity, a reminder that unexpected encounters could lead to profound transformation, that assumptions about people's worth and potential were often completely wrong, and that music possessed the power to reveal the best aspects of human nature. In the years to come, the Harbor City Community Music Foundation would continue to grow and evolve, touching thousands of lives and inspiring similar programs across the country. But its roots would always trace back to that evening at Bellacorte, when a restaurant owner learned the cost of his arrogance and a young musician demonstrated the transformative power of excellence, applied with humility and grace. 5 years after the foundation of the Harbor City Community Music Foundation, Vincent Marcelli found himself in a position he could never have imagined during his earlier life as a ruthless restaurateur. He sat in the audience of Carnegie Hall, watching 12-year-old Maria Santos perform Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1 with the New York Youth Symphony Orchestra. The girl who had once been dismissed as just another neighborhood child from a poor family was now being hailed as one of the most promising young pianists on the East Coast. Maria's grandmother, Mrs. Rodriguez, sat beside Vincent with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She clutched a program that featured a full-page photograph of her granddaughter at the piano, her small hands poised gracefully above the keys that had become her pathway to a future none of them could have previously envisioned. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Maria's natural talent, combined with rigorous training supported by foundation scholarships, had blossomed into something extraordinary. She had won 3 regional competitions, earned admission to the prestigious Manhattan School of Music's pre-college program, and caught the attention of world-renowned piano teachers who were eager to guide her development. But what struck Vincent most profoundly was not Maria's technical mastery or her growing recognition in classical music circles. It was the way she had remained grounded in her community, insisting on returning to Harbor City every month to perform for the children in the Foundation's programs and to encourage other young musicians who were just beginning their journeys. During intermission, Vincent stepped outside to call Danny, who was in Philadelphia launching the Foundation's newest satellite program. The expansion had exceeded their most optimistic projections. What had started as a single community music program in one restaurant's dining room had grown into a network of 12 locations across 3 states, serving over 800 students annually. "How's our star performing?" Danny asked when he answered the phone. "She's incredible," Vincent replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I keep thinking about that first concert in our dining room, when she was just this shy 8-year-old sitting with her grandmother. Now she's performing with a professional orchestra in Carnegie Hall. And she's still the same kid who helps the younger students tie their shoes and remember to practice their scales." Danny added with characteristic warmth, "Success hasn't changed her heart." This quality of maintaining authenticity despite achievement had become a hallmark of the Foundation's most successful students. Danny's teaching philosophy emphasized not just musical excellence but character development, community responsibility, and the importance of using one's gifts to lift others up rather than simply advancing personal ambition. The Foundation's impact extended far beyond individual success stories like Maria's. A comprehensive study commissioned by Harbor City's mayor had documented measurable improvements in academic performance, self-esteem, and community engagement among program participants. Children who had been struggling in traditional educational settings were thriving when given opportunities to express themselves through music. Perhaps even more significantly, the program had begun to bridge economic and cultural divides that had long characterized Harbor City's neighborhoods. Families from different backgrounds were forming friendships through their children's shared musical activities. Parents were collaborating on fundraising events and community performances. The monthly concerts had become celebrations that drew audiences from across the city's diverse population. Vincent had documented these changes not just in formal reports, but in personal observations that continued to surprise and move him. He had watched immigrant parents whose English was limited communicate fluently through music with families whose ancestors had been in America for generations. He had seen teenagers from different ethnic backgrounds collaborate on original compositions that blended their cultural traditions into something entirely new and beautiful.